This is the CS61B midterm 1, question 1, CS61 bot. So we're given a chatbot interface below, which has a method answer query, which takes in a string, and it also has a default method myInfo, which just returns the string I'm a chatbot. So for question A, suppose we create a class 61bot that implements chatbot. Which of the following are true? Select all that apply. So let's consider the first option. The CS61 bot class can compile even if it does not define an answer query method. So since chatbot is an interface, which lists the answer query method, any class that implements it has to implement answer query. Otherwise, the program will not compile. So this statement is incorrect. The CS61 bot class must implement answer query since it implements chatbot. Looking at the next option, the CS61 bot class can compile even if it does not define a myInfo method. So myInfo, remember, was a default method defined in the interface. So we don't need to define it in our 61 bot class. So this is true. If we override myInfo, we must add an @override tag in order for the 61 bot class to compile. So the @override tag is actually optional. It is recommended to use, but it isn't required for our program to compile or run without any errors. So this is false. If we do not override answer query, our program may crash at runtime. So remember, answer query was a method defined in the interface. Um, and so if our class CS61 bot doesn't override answer query, it actually won't compile. So remember from the first part, if it does not define the answer query method, the class will just not compile at all. And so it won't even reach the runtime stage. Um, and so since it won't reach runtime, it won't really crash in runtime either if it doesn't even reach that part of the program. So this one is false as well. And the last one, we can define a constructor for a CS61 bot, even though the interface doesn't list any constructors. So for an interface, we have to define or implement all the methods in the interface, unless it's default. But we are allowed to add any extra methods that we want in our class that may not be defined in the interface. So we can make a constructor if we want, and it won't affect whether the program errors. So this is true. Moving on to B, we define a CS61 bot class. Just looking through it, we have a static string version info, and then we override the answer query method, and then we override the myInfo method, and we have a main method right here. So the question is, what happens when the main method is executed? So let's look at the main method and see exactly what happens. So first we define a CS61 bot called bot, and we run print on bot.myinfo. So let's see exactly what bot.myinfo would do. So looking at the method myInfo, we see that it just returns version info. And what exactly is version info, right? Well, that was the static variable that we defined earlier, the string that just says CS61 bot version 5. So this is just going to return the string that we defined up here. And even though this variable is static, that doesn't affect whether any instances can access it. Every single instance can access static variables, and so it'll successfully return the string. So this program will print CS61 bot version 5. All right, moving on to part C. It says Aditya wants to add a new method, public void answer query, which takes in two strings to the CS61 bot class. What happens if he adds the method to the class without removing the existing answer query method? So remember, answer query was defined up here in the CS61 bot class. Um, and the main thing to see is that we only had one string as a parameter, versus down here, we add a new method with two strings to the class. And so um, we are allowed to do this, right? So this is the concept of overriding. We can have two methods with the exact same name, answer query, as long as they take in different parameters. So the answer query above only took in one string, but this one takes in two strings. And so we can add it to the class without causing any errors. So the CS61 bot class will compile successfully. All right, last question. What happens if Aditya replaces the method in the class, removing the existing answer query method? So now instead of adding it additionally to the other one, we're completely replacing it with our new answer query method. So the issue with this is, remember, the CS61 bot implements chatbot, right? So it has to implement every method, every non-default method defined in chatbot. And chatbot, remember, had an answer query method that only took in one string. And so the answer query method that we override in CS61 bot must also take in one string, or we have to have at least one method, the answer query, that takes in one string. But the answer query that we defined down here had two strings, and so it will not successfully override the answer query method that we defined in our interface. And so the class will not successfully compile because we do not implement all methods in the interface.